just talk a little bit just to kind of amplify what he initially said and then talk about what he saw. And he'll ask any questions of the public or the board that he wants to. Then we'll have questions from the board, and then we'll have questions and comments. Then we'll have questions and comments from the public. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes so everybody can have a chance to talk. And then we'll have final board questions after the public. So with that, Rob, do you have anything to talk about?
Well, nice to meet you all again. So my name is Rob Wood. I'm the director of the Land Bureau at the Department of Environmental Protection. So I'm a resident of Southern Maine. My office is up in Augusta. First time out on Chesapeake. So thank you for having me, first of all. I didn't prepare anything formal. As I mentioned out at Bennett's Cove, I'm really just out here on kind of a finding mission. We had some staff make a site visit a number of months ago and reported back to me. And I think, it became apparent that it would make sense for me to get out here and kind of look at it with my own eyes. So I appreciate Bob, you getting me out here, and Victoria for inviting me. And so, I'll just kind of maybe set the stage a little bit in terms of setting expectations for folks who are concerned about the barge landings and folks who are more supportive of the barge landings. I'll just kind of provide some context about the DEP's role in all of this, right? So it is Bennett's Cove is a coastal sand dune system that's been confirmed. It's mapped by the Maine Geological Survey. Again, as I expressed on site, I'm not a geologist, but it seems to me that it meets the characteristics of a coastal sand dune system. And why that's important is that coastal sand dune systems are regulated under the Natural Resources Protection Act. And they're characterized, they're defined based on their physical characteristics. So that is a sand dune system, therefore is subject to jurisdiction under the Natural Resources Protection Act. And what the NERPA requires is for certain activities in protected natural resources or adjacent to protected natural resources to be permitted by the department before they can commence. And there are specific rules for a variety of different types of protected natural resources. There's a specific rule chapter on coastal sand dune systems and activities in coastal sand dune systems. If you read through our chapter 355 sand dune rules, there are a few things that are very clear in the rules. For example, a new structure cannot be built in a frontal dune. And so Bennett's Cove is a frontal sand dune, and therefore a new permanent boat ramp, for example, cannot be constructed under our current rules, which have been in place since the early 1980s, and they've been updated a few times since. So that's kind of one issue that seems pretty black and white. A new boat ramp can't be constructed at Bennett's Cove. When it comes to the barging activity, it is a little bit more of a gray area. I think there are some open questions, and so that's really big reason why I'm not here today, and we're having some conversations internally at the department and with the Attorney General's office to kind of get our wrap our minds around this particular activity. And it has been prompted by particular concerns that have been raised and complaints that we've received about the activity. And what it really boils down to is that the NERPA requires a license for activities that displace sand, right? That is an activity that can require a license. I will be completely transparent with you that there's some level of kind of professional judgment that goes into determining where's that kind of threshold for determining what type of sand displacing activity actually does require a permit. For example, building sandcastles also is also an activity that displaces sand. And so that is not something that we require permits for. And so at some level, we have to make a determination that something has kind of crossed the threshold into an activity that needs to be regulated with a license. The other kind of tricky part about this particular scenario is that barging activity or driving trucks onto a sand dune is not something that is explicitly addressed in any way by our rules. And so If the department were to determine that a permit is required, normally if we're evaluating, for example, the construction of a house in a sand dune system, or the reconstruction of a house, can't build a new house in a sand dune system with a frontal dune with some limited exceptions. But if we were looking at a reconstruction of a house in a frontal sand dune, there's a very clear set of requirements that go along with that. When it comes to a barging activity that may or may not require a permit, we're kind of we would need to fall back on the basic standards under the Natural Resources Protection Act that are in law. And so those, you can take a look at those. It's Title 38 in the main revised statutes. It's section 480A, and then it goes on to 480JJ. And so if you take a look at the Natural Resources Protection Act, you'll see the standards in section 480D. So, those include, habitat impacts, impacts to water quality, impacts to movement of sand, right? And so that's where our sand dune rules come into play. Is most of the sand dune rules are really focused on making sure that there's no kind of unreasonable impact on the movement of sand. And there are other standards around existing uses, for example. So that sounds like maybe a standard that would potentially be applicable in this type of scenario where an activity that requires a permit can't have an unreasonable impact on existing uses. So I just lay all this out here to kind of provide a little bit of context about the issues that we'll be kind of grappling with and considering. But again, this is kind of a unique circumstance where it's not an activity that we typically encounter, or that would typically, that's expressly covered by our rules. And so we will need to make a determination at some point as to whether a permit is required for the barging activity. And if a permit is required, then there would be a process that goes along with that. There would need to be an application, and there's opportunities for folks to request a public hearing on a permit application. And then at that point, we would be evaluating an activity against the standards that are in that law. And so that's kind of where we are as of today. And again, just kind of coming out here to take a look, and really glad that the town, organized this meeting, and would be happy to hear your comments and questions. We're
going to start with the questions and comments from the board when you're finished.
Yep, and I guess just I think I got most of my questions, kind of covered in over the course of our meeting out at the dune itself. It seems like the town does have, at least based on the verbal description, it sounds like the town does have legal access to that portion of the beach. In a permitting context, if a permit were required, that would be kind of the threshold question. You have to have title, right, or interest to the property or to the area where the activity is proposed. And so that kind of initial threshold would be crossed, it sounds like. And so I guess, with that, I'm happy to hear what's on folks' minds.
Any questions or comments from members of the board? Mark?
Rob, thanks again for coming down, and I realize this is a sensitive, tricky type of issue to look at, from the regulation side back to the community side, and from all directions. We've been using this facility, I won't call it facility. We've been using the beach head at Bennett Cove Beach ever since we've been in town as of 2007. We separated from the town of Cumberland. The town of Cumberland used it as well. Been a lot of private use. I think you saw right now there's a big bunch of soft sand down there, which is difficult for the current landing of vehicles. I'll try to keep my questions simple for you. Are we restricted as a community and a town from currently using Bennett Cove Beach as it sits right now? Question number one. And question number two, are we restricted from making that sand any harder with different material right now? I'm sorry for those questions, but I think they're good questions, and I think they're valid.
So in terms of using the Bennett's Cove currently for your barge landing activity, it sounds like it continues to be ongoing and that that barges are primarily landing at high tide. Is that right? Yeah. And
Currently, I think they're having some problems according to it, whether it's a, you know, a 7.5 or 8 foot tide or 10.5 foot tide. You know, the higher the tide, the easier the access in most any landing facility or beach. So I think they're using it, but they've also been using stone wharf. And I would like some clarity, if possible, on some of this before you leave today. I'm not trying to pin you down, but you know, people are going to be asking, what was the outcome of that meeting? And I don't expect it all to be resolved today, certainly, but it would be nice to know, can we still use it? Can we do anything to assist the current
right.
material? That's my 2 questions.
Sure. So on part one, I'm not ready to say today whether a permit is required for the activity. And if a permit were required and we had made that definitive statement, then you would then be conducting an activity without a permit that needs a permit, and there would be a process whereby the department could take enforcement action if we so chose. We would start with a letter of warning, and then we'd issue a formal notice of violation. But the department always has discretion of when we use our enforcement authority, and we don't pursue every enforcement action that we legally could, simply because we don't have the capacity to do so. And I would not be concerned that the department would, if I were the town, I would not be concerned that the department is going to pursue any enforcement action prior to making any determination on whether a permit is required. So we haven't made that determination. So the activity that's happening right now, we're not going to issue a notice of violation for it because you asked us for guidance on permitting. We're in the process of determining what's necessary. We're not going to pursue any enforcement until such time that we've made such a determination if it were warranted at that time. So I wouldn't be concerned about continuing with your activity as it stands today. In terms of adding material to the beach, you could add sand that is of similar color and texture as the sand that's there now. If you wanted to add something more structural, the option for the town would be to put down a temporary structure, a temporary mat. So you could theoretically put down kind of temporary gravel or stones if you were to remove it later. But generally speaking, it's we don't consider a gravel path or kind of rocks or riprap, for example, to be a temporary structure. Theoretically, you could remove it, but it's much harder to do so than removing, for example, a mat. The Natural Resources Protection Act does not govern temporary structures. And so if you were to put down, when the barge lands, if you were to put down a temporary mat that allows for a vehicle to get closer to the barge without displacing the sand or without causing that rutting, that would be something that is, the placement of the mat is not covered under the Natural Resources Protection Act because it is a temporary structure. Temporary structures are expressly not governed by NERPA. If you were to put down, I think Bob, you had mentioned temporary kind of concrete mats or concrete mats that could be removed at some point in the future. That the kind of threshold for determining the dividing line for determining what's temporary and what's permanent is 7 months out of a year. And so it's, if you were to put down mats for 6.5 months and then remove them and they stayed out of the sand dune for 5.5 months or 5 months and 1 day, that would not be an activity that is covered under NERPA. So if you wanted to put down temporary mats, that is an option for the town.
Thank you for answering my questions.
David.
Again, thank you for making the trip, and I'm glad you got nice weather. My question is, if the permit is issued, is there any leeway while the permit is under consideration for the use of that activity?
Um, uh,
Did you mean if a permit is required? You said issue.
Yeah.
If the permit is issued, does that mean we have to stop immediately until the permit is given? Or can the activity continue while that is in process for consideration by Congress?
right, right. So if the department were to determine that a permit is required for the activity, at that point, the expectation would be that the activity cannot go on any longer without a permit. Again, we would never endorse doing that. The reality is that we don't have the capacity to pursue every enforcement case. And so it would become an enforcement case at that point, and the town would be, again, if that were the scenario that played out, the town would then be kind of assuming that risk of conducting an unpermitted activity.
And I assume there'd be fines and such if it were to continue.
That would be an option for the department. That would, an unpermitted activity could carry a penalty, a daily penalty of between $100 and $10,000. So well, I won't get into the weeds on the enforcement protocol, but the law does give us pretty strong tools for enforcing violations and activities that are unpermitted.
Other questions? Sure.
So, one of the uses for that location is transport on trash. Just want to be sure I understand. So we, is a potential future scenario, depending on our question. Temporary stabilization that can be removed within that time frame, and then potentially continuing the bargaining activity. Would you speak up? Sorry, continuing the bargaining activity during the also off season, without any stabilization. In other words, could the bargaining continue 12 months of the year, during certain periods? Mention that it's always.
That's a complicated question because I think a reason to put down that temporary amounts would be to reduce the damage to the dune. And so I would say that if you are putting down mats on a temporary basis and eliminating the kind of significant displacement of sand that might trigger the need for a permit, that there would no longer, you would eliminate the need for that permit by using the temporary mats. And then if the mats were removed and there were a substantial displacement of sand, there might trigger the need for a permit for that activity. Yes. Yeah.
And so in the scenario that we apply for a permit, that would be applicable for the full year cycle. And there could be the potential for that permit that we could install some kind of, material temporary, or is it possible with a permit to install some kind of material to protect the
That's getting into some hypotheticals, but the way that we would evaluate a permit applications is looking at all of the evidence that's brought forward in the application and that would be brought forward by interested parties. And then we would evaluate the evidence against the standards in the statute, and then we determine if the impacts were reasonable or unreasonable. And we have the ability to require conditions in order for a project to be permitted, or an activity to be permitted, and therefore, one potential scenario is that there could be a condition requiring that mats are used in certain cases. If barge lands at a certain time of day, there must be a mat, or certain times of year, there must be a map, but it's getting a little bit into the hypothetical scenarios, but we would, that's something that could be addressed in a permitting context. And, even, I would say, while I'm kind of on that topic, that, for the town, the department has not made a determination yet on whether a permit is required, but the town could make that determination itself and say, kind of elect to submit a permit application and say, we think that we should get this project, we should get this activity permitted and go through that process. That is an option for the town. You wouldn't have to wait for the department to make a decision on it. And then that could, provide a process for evaluating the activity and the impacts and taking, formal public comment, because again, I can't take this kind of formal public comment. This isn't formal. If you wanted folks kind of on the record, that would be through a permitting process.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that case that the town, sorry. In the case that the town proactively submitted, would we be prohibited from using the site, in the interim while the permit, as soon as the permit's received, is there a stop using the site? Oh, yeah.
That is a tough question, right? Because I would go back to, you would then be implicitly acknowledging that it's an activity that requires a permit, and so you'd be conducting an unpermitted activity. And so again, I don't think the department would.
Yeah. We
can never say never, but I just, given the violations that we witness daily out in the world, it wouldn't be the top priority for department enforcement.
Other questions from the board? Mika, anything you want to share?
I have a couple questions, if I may. The first question is, do you have a time frame on when it would be determined whether a permit is needed or not?
I don't have a specific date, but it seems like the town needs to know soon. So we will keep that in mind, and have already had a number of conversations that need to be had, and so I'm hopeful that we could provide a path forward.
Like weeks or months?
Just
a general idea.
Weeks, not
Okay. So that's my first question. The other question is going back to the natural dune system. The year, in the 90s is coming up. Is there any implication or difference if there is historical knowledge of it being used prior to the natural dune system being adopted? Does that have any impact on it?
That's a great question. So if the activity were taking place before the Natural Resources Protection Act became law, which was 1978, 78, I think there were 78. I mean, if it were clearly documented that an activity predates NERPA, then NERPA would not. That goes for most activities that are subject to environmental laws that predate. There's usually it's a structure, right? If a house was built somewhere that it couldn't be built today, but it predated the law or the regulations, then it's grandfathered, right? And so that could be one option if the town if that barging activity has been taking place for that long.
And my last question is, and this is going to be a very difficult question for you to answer, and you probably can't answer it. So by now you're probably aware that the municipality is in the tough position of that area being the location. And that's also the area that we're transporting our necessary services. So trash, CMP, as you heard, was unable to bring a vehicle. In recent weeks, we've received several communications about individual contractors and barging being dislocated or misplaced or canceled altogether. Any recommendations about how the municipality can kind of handle this process in this interim discussion with DMR, so then we can ensure that we're still able to provide the services for the town, but also, I mean, do we need to stagger and prioritize how the facility is used? Do we prioritize municipal use, but then we upset the contractors? How can we make everyone happy? I told you it was gonna be a hard.
I think that's,
Would you agree?
that's the select board stuff, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't have a good answer. I mean, I will say, and just looking at the site for the first time, it sounds like that when the barges are landing at the highest tides, that perhaps there's limited need for trucks to even drive onto the dune. I don't know if that's just what.
The barging, the owner did call me and I asked that question straight up because I had heard from people that they were being told that the barging was canceled. And the answer that I received was prior to them making this decision, they were able to come an hour and a half before high tide and an hour and a half after high tide, which was between 4 and 8 feet. And now they're only coming at that 8-foot mark. And so they're making trips to the stone pier. I also asked the question in terms of for every trip you make to the stone pier, how many to Bennett's and vice versa? And it's 1 trip for the stone pier is 4 trips to Bennett's. And so that is a result why so many, I think, contractors are being displaced or canceled. And so the position for the town is to try to figure out how we squeeze ourselves within that limited window to make sure that we provide the services to remove trash. And we're getting ready to go into really busy time of year, so that need is going to increase for the municipality as well as the contractors. Hence why that question was so loaded.
Busy time of year, so they go for the shrine first station following.
And Indica,
Yes, thank you.
I'd like to open it up now to any questions or comments from folks, contractors, abutters, anybody out there. I'm going to start with Lenny.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna go to broken bull. I think most people have heard of.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lenny, can you step up to within about 4 feet of the owl, please, so the listening public can hear your commentary.
I'm Lenny from CMP. I'll take care of the islands.
Just back up another foot or so. There we go, perfect.
Okay.
Otherwise, it'll just be your stomach showing and not your face.
I'm Lenny from CMP. I've taken care of 6 years. HB is one of my favorite islands. My fear has been, I use the barges all over the islands. I am a fan of the cement ramps. We used to get trucks stuck on Cliff Island all the time. A lot of damage. Doesn't happen anymore. They put in, the cement ramp. We land on beaches. Used to Great Diamond and the Little Diamond. They actually put some cement ramps in there so they can get in without getting trucks stuck there. Just to give you an idea, our ledge truck is out here because we use that because a lot of ledge and we fill the holes and stick the walls going. That's a $2 million truck. I can't, and it's not ours. So we can, as a company, lose that truck on that beach. And they have had some trucks get stuck. We've been stuck down in. But when I need to come is when the weather's worse. So that's when the storms. So northwest, northeast winds, the stone pier is not even an option. And that ice is up there. Anything on that side of the island is not an option because the barge can't land. If the winds are blowing high, they can't hold it steady. They're coming in the back of them, they can land, in Bennett because it's sheltered by 3 sides. So even if it's coming from the northwest, it's on their stern. So it keeps them in there so we can get in. And we have heavy trucks, we have trucks with poles and everything else on. Luckily, one of these last storms, we had contractors here. They come off on that beach before it got destroyed. I still have them here. I had to wait 3 days to get a pole truck to come around the other side. And what a lot of people don't understand is a business for the barge it's like a bus route. They go Great Diamond, you know, Long, Shabik, Cove, and Cliff. And that moves them, and they can move trucks, and we move, sometimes we use them to do all those. Stone Pier, if they can even get in there, we can only take one barge in there, the big barge can't fit in. So we're limited what they can run. Is that, you know, that, it's an hour and a half actually. So for me, is, and I hate to say I have to make a decision. If I have to move trucks to 3 islands and I have to move one here, they may not get it because I have to take the. And so, you know, I have a way to feed Long, not from Shabik, from Peaks. I have capabilities shifting back and forth. And if we can't move trucks here, I can't do the work. There's no sense in even coming. You know, I might as well get the rest of the bay going. And Shabik, like I say, by far, you guys, you know, you and Long Island, it's just, you know, still a really tight community. And I feel very strongly that's why I'm here today, because my job is to take care of you the best I can. We try. But like not having that ramp, it ties my hands. And it really, you know, and I have no vested interest one way or the other. Money wise, right? That's fine. It's just concerning people service that we can get in. And Stone Pier is especially in summertime. I don't want our trucks up there. We come up with a truck with a 45-foot pole. There's no place to turn. You know, I've seen trailer trucks that have fifth wheels that can't turn around there. We have just on a trailer hitch. So we can't maneuver up there, and it's an accident with that, really is. You know, I know people talk about, you know, kids down at the beaches. Well, we get on East End Beach all the time. That's the most major walking area, Great Portland area. And they love the lodges. You know, people are taking pictures. But anytime I've seen on the Stone Pier, people watching, would be people, you know, thinking it's the coolest thing. Now, somehow, you know, right now, we can't get in. And like I said, when I get in, I call them, I can't predict when the storm's gonna be. I need as much time as I can get to get you guys trucks here. And sometimes we are pushing the times, you know, as much as we can on the beach to get here. So I can't go within that window of an hour and a half and guarantee I'm gonna get you guys a truck. And as much fun as we have with them, I can't ask them to take me all the way around if they've got trips all scheduled. Because when I call them, they have trips already scheduled. So they have to drop somebody, but I can't ask them to drop 4 islands so I can come here. I can't, you know, because somebody's gonna get left somewhere. And, you know, so I'm usually just fitting in because my job is usually around emergencies, you know, and it's in the worst time. So, you know, we need to do something down there. And we've been coming in there. I've been here 26 years, and I know for at least 20 something, maybe 30 years that we've used them before. You know, that's been at least, you know, close to 50 years at least that we've used that. And like I say, because, you know, within the barge, and they have the lumber company barge that we used to use, but that's how we would come in there. We used to use the Stone Pier now and then, but, you know, as you know, as far as I know, there's a contract on that side. So I mean, if you wanted us to use CTC, they'd have to run year round, and we would use up all your spots. You know, so it's just, and like I said, I just don't want, the public to know that the way the power is provided would change without that, right? There's no question about it, and I can't control that. That's someone telling me.
Thanks, Lenny.
Okay, thanks.
Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, guys. I gotta run. Oh, thank you.
Other comments, questions? Liza Jane, please step up, please.
It's gonna take me a while.
I know you're. Post surgery, yeah,
This one and this one.
either one.
I'll take the close.
There you
You'll tell.
go. Yep.
I'd like to understand if a permit is required, does that mean it will happen? Or is it possible if the state or the town were to ask for a permit that it could be denied?
It could be denied. So the department, when we receive a license application or a permit application, we can approve it as submitted, we can approve it with conditions, or we can deny it. And so we would be evaluating the activity against the standards, and really it's a reasonableness test.
Okay.
And so it's whether, you know, we're gauging whether the activity is having a reasonable or unreasonable impact in light of the purpose of the project, the need for the project, and the harm. We weigh the harm versus the benefit.
And when you're weighing the harm versus the benefit, do you look at the fact that this is the place that's been historically used, or do you look at the place that this is at this time the best option, or is it really looking at the environmental impact?
And so there is a standard under the Natural Resources Protection Act that addresses existing uses. And so in terms of the historic use of the site, that could that could come into play when we're looking at that particular standard. So there are other standards where the historic use of the site is not applicable, but if we're looking at whether there's an unreasonable impact on existing uses, then we would be evaluating what's proposed versus what the site is currently used for.
Okay, may I have one more question?
Sure.
When we look at how it was used 25 years ago, 50 years ago, today, anticipating 25 years from now, 50 years from now, is that part of the equation? Because we look at how the use has increased so much and the impact has increased. Is that a part of it, or is the permit looking at just current use?
So when so you're asking what's our time frame when we're evaluating what the impact of the proposed activity is?
Yeah, I mean, I
Sure.
think about the fact that the use has increased and we're only going to see it increase more. And so, yeah. So will that be part of that equation?
So if a permit were required, there would, the application would be for a very specific activity. So it wouldn't just be barge landings in general. It would be a permit to land a barge for X number of tons per tidal cycle or something along those lines.
Yeah.
So there would, again, very much a hypothetical, but if that were the path that folks took here, if the town submitted an application, it would have to specify the activity and the parameters under which that activity would take place.
Okay, so it could be within how much of the tide or a number of trips a day, whatever. Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Donna?
I'm also going to keep these rates. I'll go to the empty plate.
I have a couple of questions, but
Back up a little bit.
The screen is what we're looking at there. Go to your left.
You're good.
Right.
okay, now I'm in the right place. I can. If you're gonna be a movie star, right, you're gonna figure out how to make it work. So I have some comments about this, but before that, I want to ask a question because I read the report that came from the people who came down here about the seaweed issue. And I think people were confused because it was dead seaweed that people had been taking.
Sure. So
Is that illegal?
so that that report was completed by one of our field services staff. And it was did not get. I didn't get a chance to review the entire report. I could have asked a couple more questions about the seaweed issue in particular, but there's kind of two potential types of seaweed related activities that could have been referring to. If it were harvesting of seaweed, rockweed harvesting, for example, that's actually exempt from the Natural Resources Protection Act. So legal harvesting of marine organisms is exempt, so that does not require a permit. Removal of seaweed from a beach can be done so with hand rakes or by hand without a permit. Mechanized seaweed removal generally needs a permit. Something that we're actually potentially going to revise our rules to address specifically. But if it was removal of dead seaweed by hand or with rakes, that does not require.
Okay, and following up on that, because I looked up some of the rules and I don't know what is the general rule and what comes under yours, but it did say that you could get 50 pounds for personal use without a permit there's a state law. I'm just thinking.
Oh, yeah, sure. For rockweed harvesting.
Right. For if you're having a clam bake or something.
Sure. So that would be covered by the Department of Marine Resources.
Okay.
So a different agency also.
So you don't have any, so that has nothing to do with it.
That's outside.
Because a lot of people had questions about it. So that's why I'm asking, I'm asking the clarification.
Back talking to Victoria that serious point of confusion, so I apologize for
Oh, no problem. Okay, so I'm looking at this from the perspective of the history of the space. And that road down there was laid out as a county road in 1871 or 73. And it refers to a landing place on the shore in the land of David Bennett. So we've been thinking that that's what that means. Now, how it was used is very different. I mean, there were no barges, there were no mechanisms. People used it because they had a dory and they would row over to Long Island. You know, they row to Portland or, you know, whatever they did. And they also used it, we have photographs of them using it for launching boats and that kind of thing. And primarily, there were other sites because, for example, the Stone Wharf, and there was a man named Milton Weber back in the 30s and 40s, who he brought cars to what is now known as Sunset. And so this really escalated in the 1990s because the town had just bought the Sunset property because they realized they needed a transportation hub. And people here were concerned. We had a committee called the Shabig Committee, and they were concerned about the landfill. And Cumberland had planned to close the landfill once they actually built the facility at Sunset. But the committee went to the DEP or somebody in Augusta, and they said they had to shut down the dump. So it was at that point, and they couldn't go through Cousins Island because all of the regulations were in effect, that barging really escalated at Bennett's Cove.
Well, somebody did about 5 or 10.
I've been watching.
Oh.
Keep going, but try to wrap up if you could.
Okay, well, never mind. I had a couple other questions, but never mind.
Donna should be allowed to ask her.
I think it's.
I thought I was providing information, Bob. I thought I was helping you to provide information. Okay, sorry.
We started off the meeting by saying, please keep your comments to 3 minutes so that everybody gets a chance to talk. If there's no more others that want to talk, then we can come back to people who have already spoken once. Paul.
Well, my name is Paul Daleska. I'm a co-owner, general manager of Shabig Island Boatyard. We have one of 3 ramps on Shabig Island. I want to thank Lenny, even though he's not in the room. Lenny Beckman clearly and effectively stating the history and necessity of barge landing at Bennett's Cove. I wish to reiterate, and I'm not exaggerating, that is vital for the survival of this year-round community. One has to look at this from the perspective of the barge operator. Currently in Casco Bay, there is only one. He has 2 vessels. All right. As Lenny pointed out, one of those 2 vessels is unable to call on the stone pier because it's too wide for that ramp. No boat stays in service for 12 months a year. No boat is always available. So if the vessel that cannot call at the stone pier is the only one in service, this island will have no access to landing. That is vital to have at Bennett's Cove. The boatyard supplies all petroleum needs for the year-round community on this island: gasoline, heating oil, kerosene, diesel. We receive it by barge at our facility in Dawkins Pier. I'd like to tell you that happens all the time, but that vessel goes out of service occasionally, and when it does, I need to call the barge and I need to get a truck on the beach. And like Lenny, it's never the nice days, it's never the easy days, and that barge will do it. And everybody here who drove to the meeting today, except the EV people, okay, relies on that type of thing. And everybody who wishes to stay warm in a year-round community has needs for those type of services. So again, I want to close saying the same thing I did at the beginning. It's vital. It has long historical precedence. I believe I have documentation from the barge service that predates NERPA. And if so, I'm pleased to hear that that does not apply.
Other comments, questions?
Both.
Well, I work with Shree Sand and Gravel, do a lot of excavating on the island. My pit's pretty much depleted, so now it's basically just a staging area for me to put some material in. I get a lot of I get all my material from me. Final Plant delivers it, when you can. So my question is, if the site is deemed grandfathered, can we update it? Can we put a structure?
Unfortunately, not, because it would be the activity or the structure that predated NERPA that allows for it to be grandfathered, but that would, I think what you're describing would be a new structure, and so it would be subject to the current law and the current rules.
So if it's deemed grandfathers, can we do repairs to what's there now? Like remove, excess sand on the upper side, or debris, or rocks, or, to maintain that ramp.
Well, I have to look at the specifics a little bit more, but it seems like it's just an undeveloped dune area, and so I don't think we would consider alterations to it to be repairing the structure. I mean, we would consider a structure only to be something like a boat ramp or something, kind of separate from the dune itself.
So if the area is grandfathered, can we update it? Like put some gravel in where it's sandy, or some stone to make it, to stiffen up the ramp, knowing that it's been used historically as.
No, unfortunately not. I mean, it's not the area itself that's grandfathered. It's the activity. If the activity itself predated the passage of the law, then we would be able to find that it's grandfathered. But any additional activity is not.
Okay, so if the town either pursues or DEP deems that we need a permit to continue activities down there, are lobstermen allowed to launch their boats?
So again, yes. I mean, first of all, that's not something that we would find to result in displacement of sand that would require a permit. So again, kind of going back to the need to exercise some professional judgment and how we interpret the law and the rules. There are many activities that displace sand that would technically, if you are just reading the law from a really black and white standpoint, could trigger the law and the need for a permit. But the reason why we are aware of the scenario down at Bennett's Cove and that we're investigating it is that primarily it seems that that's the kind of heavy trucking activity out on the dune that's resulting in some fairly substantial displacement of sands and fairly substantial rutting that would be more than you would see with a lobster boat landing, for example.
All right.
But
Yeah, just what's changed? We've been fixing that for years.
Other questions? Whitney, please.
Yes. I will be talking to Bennett. I'd like to give my 3 minutes to Donovan.
Thank you.
No, you have more history than anyone. I know. If they have a formal, I'll do it formally. Okay.
Anybody who hasn't spoken yet? Dale and then Meredith.
A minute to get up, and where's my cane? Oh, no, I've got it. Okay, I just would like to say I'm one of the people who grew up landing at Sunset Landing when we came by car. And then there was a study of Sunset Landing, and I'm not really sure whatever happened to it. But somehow it didn't get done, and that was to handle not just barging. It was to, I believe, it was bought with the idea that it would handle CTC and things like that. And I don't know why, if something like this comes up, there isn't a study done. There was a study done. Mary Hope did a fantastic job with her committee. And I don't know what happened, but somehow it didn't come into being. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Joe. Meredith.
Hi, Meredith Beaupre. I also work for Shebig Sand and Gravel. I want to know what has changed over the course of the years as far as that has been the amazing. And now it
So you know, the area at the top of the sand dune system,
yes,
where the trucks are entering to go to the barge.
yes.
So I don't know, I'm not familiar with what type of maintenance activity has been done there. Can you speak more to what exactly has been taking place there?
Repeat your question, Meredith, I couldn't hear all of it.
That it's been maintained throughout time, and now it's not, what's changed is not allowed. And meaning gravel and whatever put in there, make it accessible. So they were, at one time there was, riprap in there.
In that location?
Yeah.
Yep, and then so the riprap that's on the beach now is also something that could not be permitted today. And so, the reality is there's all sorts of unpermitted activity taking place across Maine that should require a permit, and we're just not aware of all the activity. And so it's entirely possible that we become aware that gravel was being placed in the sand dune, or riprap was being placed in the sand dune earlier, that we would have provided an opinion at that time that a permit was required for that activity. But moving forward, that area is regulated by the sand dune rules, which again don't allow for the placement of riprap or similar structures in a sand dune. So a ramp or even just a gravel ramp is not allowable. Again, a temporary ramp would be.
And that one other question, I thought I heard you say earlier that when you sounded like you misspoke about if the house is being built on a sand dune, and then it said it could be repaired on the sand dune and not a new structure could be built unless there's some special circumstances. What are those things?
Sure. So the Chapter 355 sand dune rules are complex, and so there are the circumstances under which one could build a house. I want to go back and refer to the rules. You can't build let's say you just have an empty parcel in a sand dune system in the frontal dune. So dunes are the frontal dunes, which is the dune ridge, what you really think of as a sand dune. That's the frontal dune. And then there are back dunes, which are kind of the overwash areas that are still sandy, but that are behind that frontal dune. There are different standards for frontal dunes and back dunes. In a frontal dune, you can't build a new house unless there are 4 or 5 really stringent criteria. You have to have houses on the lots on either side. So that's one kind of key criteria. If you have an empty lot and there's houses on either side on each abutting parcel, that's one of the criteria that you have to meet. And then there are a number of others as well that I can't rattle off the top of my head. We do have a couple of permitting staff who are experts in the sand dune rules who would be able to do so, but I'd have to go back and report to them. It's not something that we get very often because, again, the circumstances are so limited when it comes to building, when you're allowed to build a house in front of sand dune, that we rarely, if ever, would receive an application. More often we see existing houses that were built in frontal dunes before NERPA and that are damaged and that need to be reconstructed. And so the rules have specific parameters for when and how a house can be reconstructed in the frontal dunes. That's what we deal with.
So just to clarify, it's not that no structure can be built and new structure can be built in sand.
Right. So there is. Right, so it's not, there's not a blanket prohibition on building any structure in a frontal dune. There's no new structures except for, and then there's a list of structures that are allowable in frontal dunes. A boat ramp or a gravel access way for cars is not among that list. But for example, one is allowed to build a ramp for access for people with disabilities, right? You can build that in the frontal dune so folks can access the beach. So there's fire escapes on existing houses can be built in a frontal dune. So there are a list of structures that are allowable. And in very limited circumstances, a new dwelling can be built. But there's a very prescribed list of new structures that can be built.
We've got 10 minutes left. Does anybody in the public, Donna?
Well, I'll take, we need 3 minutes.
Thank you, Donna.
Okay, I just want to clarify, the question about the riprap in the sand dune. I was on the Board of Selectmen when that happened, and, someone, and I have no idea, talked to the person at Public Works, and the Public Works person went down there and dumped all this stuff, ankle breaking stuff down there. And then, an island resident, not one of the abutters, somebody who lived far away from there, then contacted the DEP. And the DEP came down and said that we had to take that out. And a lot of that stuff, we couldn't, like you said, we couldn't get it all out. They tried. When you say, Mark, they made an effort to get it out, but some of it's still down there.
So it wasn't allowed. The department pursued some sort of
The
enforcement.
First Selectmen did not know what was happening. We didn't authorize it.
Donna, do you remember when that was about? We were a town.
It was when Marjorie was the.
No, but that was the second time they did it. They did it twice. The first time was when we first became a town with our first public works director. They also did the same thing down by my house, dump junk down over the bank. But the Board of Selectmen did not know that that was happening. But, so it happened at least twice.
Different road crew. Yeah. Thanks, sir. David?
I believe you referred to, an allowed list of, applications or activities. that would be- And is that, can you, can you submit a, application for a permit for something that's not on that list, for example? Riprap or something like that would, improve the, or planks or anything else, that would improve that landing?
No, because in this case, the way the rule is written is that no new structures are allowed in the frontal sand dune, with the exception of a handful of very specific structures.
Okay, and that's not, you can't challenge that, or?
No, there is a very limited variance process in the rules for there's really two types of activities you can get a variance for. One is building a house, and it really comes down to a finding of undue hardship. And then there's another variance for requirements to elevate your structure, because if you're making changes to your house in a sand dune, you have to boost it up on stilts. And so if you can't do that for some reason, there's a variance option for that activity as well. Again, I don't want to get too far out over the skis, because truthfully, the rules are among the most complex that we have. And so you have to really read them carefully over and over again. And so but for a new structure in a frontal dune, it's no new structures except for a very specific list, and it does not include riprap or a ramp of any kind.
That's considered a structure, is what you're saying?
Exactly.
Thank you.
So we're down to 8 minutes left before we need to close this off. And I did want to give the public one last opportunity to talk before we brought it back to the select board. So, and
Sorry. Jill Gallagher, hi. Thank you all. I've been watching online and I appreciate your time. I know this is like a thankless, hard job. Rob, thank you for coming. I guess my first thing is, could you just give some clarity on the temporary, you talked about, it wasn't a tarp, what did you say? Like a mat.
Right. I mean, timber mats are often used for construction access. That's what I would envision as something that's truly temporary, that could be removed pretty readily. is kind of a timber construction map.
So it would lay down and you're saying for like 7 months or so. It just can't, whatever it is cannot displace sand, just so I understand what,
Well, if it's a temporary structure, it's simply not governed under the Natural Resources Protection Act. So that would, even if it was displacing some amount of sand, it would not require a permit because it's exempt from the law.
okay, so the temporary, so, and then the cement things that plan is just talking about, suggesting, do those fall, would that also be considered?
If the town were putting down a cement ramp or mat that it is very confident could actually be removed within 7 months and then not put back until the calendar has flipped over and you're into another 12-month period, then that could be considered a temporary structure that would be exempt from the law. But again, I think with something like riprap, I mean, it's very hard to get it out once it's gone in. So it's much harder to kind of consider that to be a temporary structure, even if somebody says that it is. Whereas if there's some kind of concrete ramp that's truly designed to be temporary and can be removed such that it is not in the same place for 7 out of 12 months, then that would not.
That would not, okay, and those would theoretically probably sink into the sand. Right, we don't know, okay. All right, and sorry, my next question is, in terms of the grandfathering in pre-NERPA of the barging at Bennett's Cove, which is a beach, would that, if that barge came in once there prior to, what did you say, 78, 73, like how, explain that to us.
Right, so we would have to,
Sorry.
we'd have to understand, we'd have to have more information. If it was once, probably not. Typically, we're dealing with structures more so than kind of a repeated activity like barge landings. So another example of a very clear requirement in the sand dune rules is that you cannot put in a new seawall in a sand dune. But of course, if you go to beaches in southern Maine, there are plenty of seawalls, and those seawalls were put in prior to NERPA. So right. Those structures are grandfathered; they can be maintained. That's usually what we're dealing with. In this case, again, this is not an activity that we are typically alerted to or that typically triggers the need for a permit. And so that's why we're looking at this really closely and trying to understand, is this something that does or doesn't require a permit? If it were determined that it does require a permit, then if there were evidence that the activity that we're saying requires a permit predates the law that would trigger the need for a permit, then I think there would be a good case to be made that is not subject to the law.
But I guess, right, so we'll have to see like how much activity it actually was to make.
It was a regular barge prior to the enactment.
Okay.
That would be helpful for us to know in making our determination.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jackie, are you coming up to talk?
Pardon?
Are you coming up to talk?
Yes.
Okay, and then we're gonna have to make that the last public comment because we need to make sure we get this fellow to the vote on time.
I'm Jackie Trask. I live at Bennett's Cove and grew up there. So my question is directed to Mark, he having grown up in the neighborhood. Do you think there was any barging activity onto the Bennett's Cove beach prior to 1978?
I think it's possible. I'm not confident that I could come up with any documentation myself. Possible.
What year were you born?
61.
Thank you.
When I went down to Venice, it wasn't to watch the bargain.
Okay.
Well, I'm in that same ballpark. Thank
So
you.
it's very possible. I'm not in knowledge of it as of today. I can't recall. I think like Donna said, possibly some barging landed there, but there definitely was barging landing in other places that are not in use as of today. And then it did definitely accelerate with the closing of the dump to the transfer station.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'd like to come back to the board just for any quick comments or questions from anybody on the board.
Mark, very quickly, sorry, once again. Doesn't sound to me like you're going to leave today with a statement or a notion that the town of Shebig or the community of Shebig is not allowed to land at Bennett Cove as of right now.
Yes, that is correct. Your statement, I agree with your statement.
Okay. And it also sounds like we probably will not get permission to do much of any improvement with the existing soft sand. Or we may be allowed to do a little bit with the soft sand or none at all.
You could add sand, but that is about it.
Thank you. I do have a question to clarify on that. If sand has moved from one area to another,
yeah,
can the town move the sand back?
Generally speaking, yes. Yes, I mean, if you're thinking about if it gets washed up on the road, can you push it back down into the beach? Is that what you're thinking?
It's more that it got washed from down the beach at, let's say, right at the high tide line.
Yeah.
It came down toward where the ramp is. That's the
Right.
current situation.
Yeah.
So can it be
That's-
moved back along the same latitude on the beach, if you will?
Oh, boy. That's not something we generally encounter. Usually folks are wanting to go the other way because it's a protective measure, right? If you can push sand from down on the bottom of the beach up to the
Beach
dune.
replenishment, yeah.
We don't get a lot of requests to go down, pushing sand from the top down to the bottom.
This is like top to bottom. This is along the same altitude, from left to right, if you will.
You know, I would like to get the opinion of a main geological survey on it.
Yeah.
And then we could see, you know, we've allowed what we call beach scraping, again, moving from the bottom of the beach up to the dune through a permit by rule, just so we're aware of the activity is taking place. And that could potentially kind of fit into that category. But main geological survey has to approve those activities under permit by rule. And so it would be good to get their take on whether there would be any sort of adverse effects from doing that activity.
So should we follow up with?
Sure, let's follow up on it, yeah. But I don't think, I mean, if the outcome is, you know, loose, you know, getting a lot of the looser sand out of that area, I see what you mean. I mean, I still think
It's been suggested. I don't know that it's a good idea. It's been suggested.
right.
Think about that. With that, we need to close this down so we can get him to the boat. I really appreciate everybody comments. Everybody coming, both to the beach and to here. It's great to have such a nice turnout of people with a wide range of opinions, and
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no,
really appreciate Rob coming out. Thank you for having me. Thanks, everybody.